Hello again, Bat fans! In this episode, we will check out the first appearance of one of Batman's most strange enemies in the story called the Ratcatcher. Somewhere in Gotham City, an elder man struggles to break out of his prison, where he has been locked away for too long. He manages to bend one of the bars of his cell, and after years of captivity, he is finally free. However, he was not the only prisoner. There are 3 other men in other cells, and they ask the man, who they call Judge, to help them out. Judge cannot help them because he is weak, and he fears that the man who locked them might return at any moment. Judge leaves the prison, but promises to bring help to get them out. Judge walks out of the prison, but the way to freedom is still far ahead. Just a few seconds later, the captor of the prisoners finds Judge, and using a special whistle, he sends a large group of rats after him. This man wears a protective suit, including a gas mask, and calls himself the Ratcatcher. Judge runs across the sewers, looking for an exit, closely followed by hundreds of rats. Finally, he finds a ladder towards a manhole that leads to the streets of Gotham, but he can't climb fast enough. His whole body is weak after being trapped in that prison for too long. Judge barely manages to get out, but the rats have already caught up to him. He tries to run, but the rats swarm over him and start biting his whole body. Judge is entirely covered by rats, and he continues walking forward, screaming for help. He finally comes around the corner where Batman was busting down some random criminals. The Dark Knight takes down the crooks as fast as he can, and then he goes to save Judge, who is overwhelmed by rats. From the distance, the Ratcatcher uses his whistle and makes the rats return to him, leaving only the corpse of Judge behind. Batman examines the body as rain begins to pour down on Gotham. He knows the rats were acting very strange, and to understand things better, he goes to a higher place, where he spots the rats going back to the sewers along with a man. Batman descends and follows the rats into the sewers, just as the police arrive to arrest the criminals captured by Batman. The GCPD also find the corpse left by the rats, and they recognize him as Wyatt Hogan, one of Gotham's best-known judges. Down in the sewers, Batman follows the trail of the rats until he comes across the Ratcatcher. Batman interrogates the criminal and learns that he has more victims locked up somewhere in the sewers, but before he could attack, the Ratcatcher sends all his rats to attack Batman. The Dark Knight uses a flare from his utility belt to disperse the rats as they avoid the bright light, and he starts chasing down the Ratcatcher. The criminal runs to a valve and opens it, releasing a massive flow of sewage water into the tunnel. Batman is helpless as he finds himself trapped in the incoming wave of wastewater. With Batman gone, the Ratcatcher returns to check on his prisoners to make sure no one else tries to escape. At the GCPD, Commissioner Gordon learns that Judge Wyatt Hogan has been found, and he recalls that Hogan went missing almost 5 years ago. Gordon turns on the bat signal to discuss this strange case with Batman, but the Dark Knight is barely recovering from being flushed away in sewer water. The contaminated water makes Batman sick. His body is weak, he feels nauseated, and after throwing up and calming the spasms of his body, Batman regains control and gets ready to confront the Ratcatcher once again. Meanwhile, the GCPD organizes a search party to go into the sewer from which the judge had come. Using protective suits, 4 officers descend into the sewers to investigate where did the victim come from. At that moment, the Ratcatcher is feeding dead rats to his prisoners when his animals alert him of the police presence in the sewers. The Ratcatcher goes to confront them and sends all of his rats to attack the police officers. One of them is entirely devoured by rats, and the other 3 run back to the streets. As all this is happening, Commissioner Gordon investigates the death of the judge and learns that the Gotham Sanitation Department used to have an employee who claimed he could train rats to attack people. His name is Flanagan, and he was arrested for murder almost 15 years ago. The judge who pronounced his sentence was the late Wyatt Hogan. To make things worse, Gordon also learns that 3 other people involved in the capture and arrest of Flanagan also went missing at the same time as the judge. In the meantime, Batman returns to the sewers, and this time he makes a torch to light up the dark tunnels. Batman returns to the spot where he confronted the Ratcatcher and finds that all his rats are feeding on the corpse of the dead officer. The rats turn around and attack Batman, but the Dark Knight uses the torch and a canister of gasoline to burn all the filthy rodents. Back in his dungeon, the Ratcatcher knows that he has been exposed, and he realizes that he has to escape. He would have liked to torture his prisoners longer for what they did to him, but given the circumstances, he decides to kill them there. Flanagan kills his first prisoner, but the gunshot draws the attention of Batman, who manages to locate the Ratcatcher's dungeon and stops him from killing the 2 remaining prisoners. Batman disarms the Ratcatcher, and the criminal uses his whistle again to summon his animals. Unfortunately for him, they have all been burned to ashes, and without their help, he is completely useless. With one magnificent, glorious punch, Batman takes down the Ratcatcher and rescues the prisoners. Just a few minutes later, Batman takes the prisoner to the surface and delivers the Ratcatcher to the police, but he doesn't stay around to chat, because he needs to get his wounds cleaned and treated, and he hopes to never again see a rat. The Ratcatcher was the new enemy created for the Batman comics by Alan Grant, John Wagner, and Norm Breyfogle. The same creative team that created the ventriloquist now created a new and absolutely bizarre enemy. That's the great thing about this era of Detective Comics. The creative team was not afraid of experimenting with new and strange ideas, and introduced some interesting characters. Despite how strange and bizarre the concept sounds, they managed to create a good story around the Ratcatcher. Just like with Scarface, this story showed us the hideous side of Gotham, those dark places where the most horrible things happen. That is what this story achieves so well. It doesn't shy away from the harsh reality. A man devoured by rats sounds absolutely horrifying, because it is, and this story doesn't need to hide it. The great thing about the story is that it's honest storytelling, and I appreciate that. But perhaps the reason why the story works so well is because of the art. In the previous video, Batman confronted the KG Beast in the sewers, but the art by Jim Aparo didn't reflect the nastiness of the place. Those sewers look very clean and nice. In this story, Norm Breyfogle created the perfect atmosphere for a dark and nauseous place such as the sewers of Gotham. Norm is also responsible for the design of the new villain, the Ratcatcher. The entire uniform gives this character that menacing look, although in the end he is not that big of a threat. But besides the unique design, the Ratcatcher was a perfect villain for this story. His background is revealed in a very original form instead of the typical "let me tell you my tragedy" trope. Thanks to Gordner's investigation, we learn that Flanagan is not a crazy, deranged lunatic. He is a street-level criminal who went to prison, and upon release he started a vendetta. He shows no remorse or human empathy and uses his abilities to punish the people who did him wrong. So yeah, he was good for this story, but I guess that was it. What else could they do with him after this story? With Scarface, he could get out of prison and resume his criminal activities in any shape, form or fashion. But the Ratcatcher? Would he start his vendetta again? That doesn't sound interesting. So what I'm saying is that because it was difficult to come up with new stories for this enemy, he was not used very much after this story. Now, let's talk about Batman. How many stories, not only Batman stories, but in general, how many stories do you know of that take place almost entirely in the sewers? It's a rather strange setting. It's dark, uncomfortable, foul, and not very appealing, and that makes it perfect for Batman. Sure, it's nice when Batman has to confront supervillains, chasing them around rooftops or driving the Batmobile, but the real character, the dark figure of the night, really shines in these kind of unsettling stories in the dark tunnels underneath Gotham. Here we have the crime fighter Batman, and we can witness a perfect contrast of him fighting 2 different opponents. When he confronts the criminals on the streets, he becomes like a shadow, a spawn of the night that preys on evildoers. But when he confronts someone who is even stranger than he is, Batman becomes more human. His vulnerabilities are exposed because he is not prepared to deal with the unexpected. We get to see Batman getting sick, defeated and throwing up on the streets. This has to be the first time we see such moments, and it's not a moment of degradation or indignity, but just a human moment. However, we know Batman is not just another human, and it shows really well. Any other person would quit after the first encounter, but Batman persists and goes to the sewers again to stop the criminal and save his prisoners. He does it just as much because of his obsession for capturing criminals as for his need to save innocent people. It's a great balance. That said, there is no Bruce Wayne here, and it starts to become obvious that this creative team didn't care much about the millionaire playboy persona. And as I said in the Scarface video, there is no boy wonder in this story. They definitely abandoned the idea of Robin from Detective Comics, and by the looks of it, people actually like this approach. If only they knew what was coming. But that was not the only surprise the Bat fans had back then. Around the same time, they had to say goodbye to Batgirl for one last time, as she officially retired. So go ahead and subscribe, because in the next episode, we will check out the last Batgirl story before things get really dark. Until then, Godspeed, my friends.